Joining us now is Owen Jones. He is a YouTuber, columnist, and UK politics expert, and we're very honored to be joined by him. It's good to see you, Owen.
Politics expert, I'll take that. Hey, how you doing? Great to see you both.
Absolutely.
Very good. Good to see you too.
It's good to see you, man. Let's put this up there on the screen. Owen, we had to get your read as to what is going on in the UK. Labour wins big, but as the headline says here, the UK's electoral system is creaking. I know you've got some thoughts as to what's happened. I believe your prime minister is actually here in our town, here in Washington, only a few miles away from us. So what has happened as a result of this election, and what should we know about it?
So, well, Labour were always on course for a big win. That's because of the Conservative collapse. The Conservative government was the most disastrous in democratic history by 2 counts, I would say. Firstly, it doesn't have any big achievements on its own terms. So previous Conservative governments, people like me would rail against them, but they would think, we did a big success, we did this, this, and this. Thatcherism reshaped Britain its own image, and also presided over the worst squeeze in living standards ever recorded in modern British history. So they were, and then they had multiple scandals. They had Liz Truss, who turned Britain into a big laboratory at citizens as guinea pigs for this really weird hard right libertarian economic experiment, which went badly wrong, crashed the economy, led to her being kicked out of Downing Street after 48 days. She famously, a lettuce outlived her, which I think became very famous internationally. Will let the lettuce or Liz Truss survive? So basically, they were in a mess. They collapsed as a political force. What was striking, though, is Labour were going to win a landslide by default, even though Keir Starmer's not popular. He's the most unpopular leader of the opposition to win an election in modern times. And what's, we have a bizarre electoral system, first past the post like your own, but with its own British sort of twist. And Labour won a third of the vote. In fact, Labour got almost the same share of the vote as they got last time in 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn when they were routed. And they got a lot less than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017. So they got 40% of the vote in 2017. They actually got less votes this time than they got last time, but they won a landslide. In fact, on a third of the vote, they won 2/3 of the seats. That sounds odd. It sounds bizarre. It is. It doesn't make any sense fundamentally. It's our electoral system. A lot of Starmer's defenders go, well, that's the game. You have to win the electoral system. I get that. They're a legitimate government. But if you're winning, no government has ever won a majority on such a low share of the vote. And they didn't just win a majority. They won a massive landslide in seats. People are calling this a Jenga. The game of Jenga, where you build it up and with a little prod it can come crashing down. It's like a landslide that's a big Jenga tower, because it's built on such a slim share of the vote, and on both the hard right and also from the left, they faced Labour big challenges, which if they're complacent, the whole thing will come crashing down.
Yeah, so it seems like less of a major victory. It was less that Labour won and more that the Tories collapsed, and also voter turnout collapsed as well, as people were, and this is something we're very familiar with, not so happy with the choices that they had available to them. Let's go ahead and put E3 up on the screen. Guys, this was Owen's column that he wrote in The Guardian, in which you pointed out that this left revolt is significant and that it could be a real problem for Labour. I'd love you to speak to some of the issues that lefties such as yourself have been upset over. But you point out something that's really quite astonishing here. Half of Labour voters cited getting Tories out as the main reason for their vote. Only 5% cited that it's because they agree with Keir Starmer's policies, and only 1% cited Keir Starmer's leadership. So not exactly inspiring statistics there.
No, this was a poll by YouGov. So they asked, what was the main reason you're voting Labour? 49% said to get the Tories out, 5%, as you said, the policies. I'd love to actually ask those 5%, what are your 3 favourite Labour policies? They would struggle. The vast majority of the public aren't even aware of what most of Labour's policies are. The issue there in terms of what Labour's prospectus is Britain is in a mess. It's in its worst mess since the war. Worst squeeze in living standards ever recorded. The public sphere is just falling apart. Our National Health Service, which a former Tory politician called the closest the English have to a religion. We take the NHS very seriously, our National Health Service, publicly run healthcare. Whether you're right wing or left wing, people see this as the kind of crowning glory. It's in a mess. It's falling apart. I mean, you could go on. It's just this place is a disaster. It's infrastructure's for, people kind of think Britain needs to be switched off, and maybe if you turn it on, maybe it'll start working again. The country doesn't feel like it works. The trains don't work. Nothing works. And the problem is Labour don't have policies to address that. They refuse to increase taxes on the rich. They're to the right of Biden on economic policy. They don't. There were £20 billion a year cuts, which are looming, and they've got the same fiscal rules of the Conservatives. They support continued, expanding privatisation of the NHS. And on foreign policy, they, stood squarely behind Israel's genocidal rampage, including Keir Starmer saying that Israel had the right to cut off energy and water to civilians. So what that meant was, and this is why it's such an odd landslide, when Tony Blair won in 1997, he won about 44% of the vote. He got about 10 points higher than they did. And you didn't have a left revolt. In this election, the Greens took 4 seats. They had 1 before, and various independents won seats as well. But also the Greens are now second place behind Labour in 47 seats. And that's never happened before. This is the best result of the non-Labour left in British history. So now, as well as on the hard right, there was challenges from the left, because this has happened before they're even in power. That's very rare. You don't get disillusionment from the left with Labour before they've even taken office normally, but that's already happened, and that's different from Tony Blair.
That's really interesting. So yeah, as you said, as I understand, the Reform Party and the Greens also put up significant results against both of the centrist coalitions. So in the U.S., everyone's like, oh, what a big win for Labor. But it's actually quite more of a complicated story than that. As you said on foreign policy, maybe you can expand that a little bit, both with regards to Israel, but also with regard to Ukraine. Like I said, your prime minister is here in Washington right now. As I understand it, does he share the same Ukraine policy as Rishi Sunak? Is there any change whatsoever in that? Maybe you can break both of those down for us.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any significant change. Yeah. And to be honest, that's the consensus here. I mean, if you look at France, the French left triumphed. They have the same policy on Ukraine. Mm-hmm. To be honest, I don't think there's much of a discussion or a debate about that within British foreign policy. The big schism is over Palestine. And, the position of the Labour leadership is that basically voters had nowhere to go. Muslim voters have nowhere to go. But there are 4 million, bear in mind our population is 67 million or so. There are 4 million British Muslims. They're a significant part of Labour's electoral coalition. They're treated with contempt. They're briefed about in very derogatory ways by Labour officials. When Labour Muslim councillors were resigning, these are local party elected politicians, when they were resigning, a Labour official briefed that Labour was shaking off the fleas. Previously, Muslim disillusionment was explained as anti-Semitism and homophobia, just smears against entire communities. What you saw is Muslim voters either going for independence, who have also, they defeated 2 senior Labour shadow ministers. You've got a landslide where Labour shadow ministers were getting defeated. It's very weird. And that's partly because of not just Muslim voters, but other voters. The Greens did partly well over Gaza. The fact is, people claim that foreign policy is irrelevant in elections. It was barely discussed in the election campaign. We had no discussion pretty much about Palestine or any foreign policy issue, or even about, there was more discussion about trans people than there was about poverty. It's insulting. This is the sort of democracy we have in this country. There are some parallels with what's going on over there. I get that.
Feel your pain.
Sounds familiar. If anything, it's probably our fault. We exported it to you. Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Owen, on that, we can put, E2 up on the screen. Do you expect any shift in the policy vis-a-vis Israel? I did see this Labour expected to drop challenge to the ICC over Netanyahu arrest warrant. So do you think there might be any improvement whatsoever? Were you heartened to see this move? What did you make of this?
Yes, I welcome this. And, what Rishi Sunak's Conservative government did as a parting gift to Israel is they lodged an appeal to the International Criminal Court to stop the chief prosecutor's request for arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And they did that on the spurious claim basis that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over Israel-Palestine, when it absolutely does. That has already been dealt with. It was worrying, it was concerning that the pre-trial judges had even accepted that appeal to be considered, which is what they had. They then extended the deadline for submission for the case on the basis there'd been an election. That now appears that the Labour government is going to drop that. I'd say the bar's on the floor because obviously other European governments haven't submitted that in the first place, but obviously that's very welcome. What also may well happen, I mean, they said, for example, the government here had likely been given, well, they've been given legal advice over Israel. A conservative senior politician who was in charge of the defense committee, which in Parliament, which kind of scrutinizes government on the issue, she said that legal advice had been given that Israel had broken international law, which anyone who isn't completely deranged can see as an obvious truism. But that would mean that Britain has to stop selling arms and cease all intelligence cooperation with Israel. So the question now is, will they release that advice and will they cease arms sales? Britain doesn't sell that many arms to Israel compared to not just the US, but Germany, which sells a lot more. But nonetheless, that's important. But there's, you know, what Britain has done at the moment, the Labour opposition in the manifestos, they said they'll recognise Palestine at some point in the future. That's not what Spain has done and Norway have done. They recognise Palestine already. So the bar is on the floor, but there is an improvement there, definitely, just by the fact they're not trying to hijack, or sorry, they're not trying to, you know, destroy the requests for arrest warrants, for example.
Interesting.
Oh, and thank you so much. It's so great to have your analysis. We're really grateful for your time.
Thanks, man. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.